the US and Ukraine are close to a massive arms deal, purportedly over $90 billion. And Vladimir Putin appears to be having a literal meltdown. Just why is the Russian armed forces so worried about this potential collaboration between Ukraine and the US? I'm Paul, US Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. By the way, you notice that I cover a lot of issues that are pretty political, and I'm not afraid to state my opinion. And that's because you guys have my back as members at combatvetnews.com. This is my personal site. It's not a Patreon, but it works just the same way. Become a member, get access to exclusive, uncensored combat footage, including some of the stuff that units that we support send me straight from the front lines. So if you're interested in those exclusive videos and supporting me and the team, the link is in the description. Okay. So this has been a crazy story because Ukraine is reportedly nearing a major arms deal with the United States. Now, you may think to yourself, well, Ukraine is a much smaller economy than the US, but the Ukrainians have become exceptionally, unusually world-class at producing combat drones. And the US wants in on the action. Right? This is reportedly a mega deal, a major agreement on the purchase of American weapons and a drone deal to sell Ukrainian drones to the United States, right? He says, Zelensky has said, quote, "We've discussed the main things, agreed with the United States president, and are now moving on to practical implementation," right? So sort of like the White House TikTok deal, the two key parties have reached an agreement, and now it's just about execution, right? Now, Kiev says it wants up to $90 billion of U.S. weapons to purchase. Kiev is also interested in separate agreements for other types of weapons like long-range missiles. But he said he can't provide more details because it is very sensitive. However, the other side of the coin is that the Ukrainian government is ready to sell Ukrainian-made drones and other weapons to countries beyond the U.S., right? Ukraine will export military equipment it holds in surplus and spend the profits on urgently needed weapons such as interceptor drones, right? And this is, of course, a system designed to meet Ukraine's military needs. Just think of it as simply like trading. If you are Ukraine, you're very, very good at producing, for example, radio frequency controlled drones. But in the era of electronic warfare and jamming, those are less important than high-level interceptors or strategic strike drones. So you sell those and you use the proceeds to purchase the stuff you really need, right? Zelensky continued, "I'm not sure all of our businesses are satisfied. They want to sell everything everywhere at once. But of course, our priority is replenishing the Ukrainian army. And that will be our priority until the end of the war. In any case, therefore, exports will be controlled until the end of the war," right? But what the fundamental takeaway from this is that this would allow simply a tit-for-tat type of agreement where, again, Ukraine provides the U.S. with drones, and they receive very expensive American-made weapon systems, the kind of things that are too sophisticated and too niche for the Ukrainians to produce, while the U.S., which doesn't have the ability to manufacture weapons at scale, can take advantage of massive Ukrainian investments in large-scale drone production. Now, what does Vladimir Putin think of all this? Nothing good. He is furious, launching a massive, one of the largest of the entire war, drone and missile attack on Kiev. About 10 people were killed and injured around the city, including a 12-year-old girl. The targets, of course, in classic Russian fashion, include such military sites as an institute of cardiology and a state hospital, you know, for all those heart failure patients who are contributing to the Ukrainian military. But this is, again, par for the course for someone like Vladimir Putin, who literally their goal is to put punish the Ukrainians. And while some of this is likely related to these kind of agreements, I think it's also heavily influenced by, according to the Ukrainian foreign minister, he describes that this war, and particularly Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil infrastructure, are damaging for Putin personally, his oligarchs' pockets, his economy, and his regime. Right? This has proven very effective at creating real problems for the Russian public. And remember, Vladimir Putin has worked tirelessly in this war to insulate the Russian public, particularly the average Russian consumer, from the effects of the war, right? From recruiting Russians in poor, remote areas, oftentimes from communities that don't even speak Russian, to implementing massive interest rate increases in order to tamp down increasingly out of control inflation, to literally selling portions of his country and his largest businesses to China in order to ensure that China is willing to keep the flow of cheap consumer goods into Russia flowing. All of these things have been done in the service of ensuring that those Russians, from really the level of like the oligarch down to upper middle class professional Russians, that is a core that Vladimir Putin doesn't necessarily need their support at scale, but he needs them to be pacified. He needs them to be placated. And if once they start to feel material pain, they are going to start to lose support for this war. Again, imagine how you would feel about the American public would have felt about the Iraq War if the American public would have felt about the Iraq War if at year 3 or 4 of the war, Iraq somehow there was some sort of oil boycott causing a massive spike in oil prices, and the 2008 collapse, instead of being attributed to real estate speculation, was directly attributed to the Iraq war, say sanctions, right? How long would the U.S. public have continued to support that war? Not very long, because again, this is something where that initial surge of patriotism tends to give way to a sort of resignation, particularly for the Russian public, who has been lied to essentially about the state of the war, right? The Russian, according to most Russian propagandists, Russia has been on the brink of victory, just days away from the defeat of the Ukrainian army, literally for 4 straight years. And at some point, as the Russian public, you're going to sit there and go, well, if we can't trust what the government says, then maybe we are actually losing this fight. Or again, even worse, the Russian public might say, why are we even here in the first place? We've incurred only pain for this obvious war of choice. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks so much to our Colonel tier members, guys like Sergei Zinchenko, Alan Nuts, and Alfred Chesky, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you. See you in the next one. Hit subscribe. Cheers.